Hey folks, how's it going? My name is Lexi, and every week, once a week, I review a tabletop game here on the gaming table. If that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to subscribe and keep watching. This week we are talking about a game that has a bit of a legacy behind it. This game was first published in the 90s, and for its 20-year anniversary, they published a new edition. If you enjoy the tales of Viking mythology, then you should absolutely stick around. This is Ragnarok Fate of the Norns by Andrew Vakalkas. Fate of the Norns is set in a semi-historical, semi-mythic version of the Nordic countries in their pre-Christian era. When someone is born, the Norns gather together to decide their fate. Some are destined to live mundane, boring lives. Others are destined to go on adventures. These will be the characters of your campaign of Ragnarok Fate of the Norns. The world these heroes have been born into is a chaotic one. The world has fallen into the second stage of an apocalyptic event known as Ragnarok. In the second stage, the world is plunged into darkness. In this time, hostile mythic beings roam. The humans are squabbling amongst one another, and different branches of the world tree move to go to war with one another. On top of this, people who are preaching the word of a one true God have come to your land on horseback, ready to convert you by force and the sword if necessary. In this world, the players take on the role of dwellers, who must travel through this chaotic world for glory and acclaim. If you know nothing about Viking mythology or the pre-Christian Nordic countries, do not stress, there is plenty of lore in this book for you to have a look. I, however, have a pretty okay understanding of Viking mythology and a general idea of the history of the Nordic pre-Christian era, so I happen to mostly skim through this section. I definitely noticed that the influential and more prominent mythologies that we know about today are definitely represented in this book. To play this game, you might perhaps want to look up who the Viking gods were and maybe look at a picture of the world tree, but a lot of that content can unfold really well in the world of this game. This game uses tokens known as runes instead of dice. There are three main categories of runes in this game: physical, mental, and spiritual. These are the three broad categories of possible actions that dwellers will have in the game. For most simple challenges, the game master, the Norn, will ask the players to pass a test. The Norn will set a difficulty number and perhaps a category. The dwellers will then draw from an opaque container a certain number of runes, and they hope to match the score and requirements to pass the test. For example, if you needed to, say, jump over a slim ravine, the Norn might ask for a 2 physical test. Each player will then draw into their container and hope to draw at least 2 physical runes. Challenges that require the players to use their brain will use their mental runes, and challenges about the supernatural or religious will probably use the spiritual rune. In a pinch, you can exchange 2 runes into 1 rune of your desired category. There's also a void rune in-game, which does its own special thing. A set of runes in this game has a total number of 25 pieces. Something that I had to wrap my head around a little when I first encountered this game was the board that is used for combat. It's technically a mat. First of all, it is stunningly beautiful. There are several different divisions on the mat which will represent different aspects of combat that you might use in a game. Damage, for example, of different categories is tracked by taking runes from your opaque container where you draw for most of your challenges and placing them in the correct relevant damage pool. That's right, it's not just physical damage, there's other forms of damage as well. There's also a section for runes in your hand. These perhaps are runes that you've already drawn that can be used for something in the future, and then there are also runes for effects in play. So say if there's some sort of... The runes in play might be about effects that go beyond each sort of round of combat. There's also a section for contingency runes screens where you can set up actions that will be triggered by certain conditions. There are a lot more options for combat than what I have set out in that mat. There are actions for moving, different types of attacks, trying to persuade someone in battle. There's plenty of options for what combat can look like. Combat also asks players and the Norn to bring a hex grid to the table. I mentioned something called the Void Rune earlier. For example, in combat, this can be used to stand in for a rune that you don't have that you might need for a certain move. And did I also mention there's magic in this game? You can do things in the game like spending spiritual runes to call upon divine aid. You can do things like transforming your body. You can add an effect to a battle, or you could strengthen or weaken another effect. I certainly think the combat and the magic system in this game are pretty robust. To create a character in this game, you first need to decide what level your characters are going to be. This affects how much essence and destiny you have. Essence is the number of runes your character knows, so the number of runes you have access to, whereas destiny is the number of runes you are allowed to draw at any time. It tends to be that the higher the character level is, the more runes that they will know, and perhaps the more destiny they have. These numbers, of course, can be different from one another. When building a character, you get to draw the number of runes that your character will have. These runes can also help you decide what your character is like, their personality, background, or perhaps who they know. You also get to choose your gear, your social connections, and also an archetype. I am just covering a broad overview of the character creation process. I definitely think the character creation options in the archetypes have lots of great ideas, and they're very worth flipping through while you're trying to see what kind of character you might like to play. The archetypes also might give you access to powers, which are represented on a grid table. You get to start on a free space in the middle, and as you advance your character, you get to fill in runes on the spaces near that first center square, which will then give you access to new powers. Characters in this game can, of course, gain better equipment, learn more runes, gain more destiny, or use more powers. Your character could also die, though. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is a bad thing. When a character dies, you might decide to create a new character, and having played a previous character who's died, hopefully gloriously, you'll get to start a new character from a higher level. There are also stories in this game that can't be told in the human world. This game has a lot of positive press around it, and I can totally see why. The game mechanics are about a medium crunch, but they have some really interesting possibilities and options. The world is also a great one to play in. It's a dark, apocalyptic fantasy. I also have to mention the amazing illustration work in this book. Every page is stunning, and it is great to just look through and enjoy this game's aesthetic. If you are looking for a game set in Viking times, then this could be a really great option. It's inspired by both history and mythology, so it creates a really fun fantasy setting to play in. There's possibilities for grounded and fantastical stories to be told. I do think perhaps the game's layout would be different today. This edition was published in 2013, and these days I've noticed tabletop games don't necessarily have huge chunks sections of lore, and the character creation usually comes as the first section. In this book, it's towards the back. I will say, in spite of my very mild gripe about the layout, there's a great table of contents which makes jumping around super easy. I will say this game also comes with everything you need to play in forms of pages you can photocopy or print. So with just a PDF, you can jump into this game straight away. This book also includes a bunch of resources for running the games and playing in the world. I know some people love having dice, but if your players are looking for a Viking-esque fantasy and they're open to a diceless system, this would be at the top of my list. Even if they're not necessarily open to a diceless system, I would still see if they would take it. You can currently get a print copy of this book from Drive-Thru RPG for around $60, and that's a super reasonable price for how much love and work I can see has been put into this game and this book. If you've played this game, or the previous edition of it, please let me know what your thoughts were in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what people played and how they enjoyed this world. While you're down in the comments, I encourage you to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, maybe share with a friend. It all helps this channel keep going and get more notice. I also have a Ko-fi page which you can donate to support this channel, or you can just see what I'm working on at the moment there. I hope you're all well, and I look forward to seeing you next time at the gaming table. Bye!